Hello and welcome to this month's second edition of the usually monthly podcast about the cultural life and times of one of the UK's most beloved artist-led creative hubs, Salford's Islington Mill. So I've been away on taking a podcast summer holiday, but I've come back now, and like I mentioned just there, this is the second edition of Islington Mill and for this month, and it's a follow-up to the first edition, which dropped a couple of weeks ago, which was about the club space at Islington Mill, which has now been given the kind of not quite official, but semi-official name, the HomoMill club space, the HomoMill project space, I think technically exactly, as HomoBlock are paying the rent for the club space in Islington Mill and using it as a space to host and develop a number of different projects by some of the people around and involved in HomoBlock and other people who are just from the Greater Manchester queer community. In the first edition of the HomoMill project space, I guess this is a two-parter, but I don't know what I'm going to call this one. I think I might call it Project Space Part 2. We'll see when I get to do the title at the end. You'll see when it's on the graphic as well. But in the first edition of this kind of two-piece podcast series, I interviewed from HomoBlock itself Rod Connolly and Sophie B about their involvement in the club space and what this project means and what their vision for it is, as well as Bill Campbell from Islington Mill and the history of the club space, in a kind of rushed little history there, but also his vision for what the HomoMill project space can and should be. So if you want to hear more about the lead up to basically like part one of this part two series, then go back onto the page where you found this podcast and go back one and you'll be able to listen to that original podcast from 2 weeks ago. The reason that this is so tightly connected to that is that there was another person that I wanted to interview for this podcast series, not the Islington Mill, but this one specifically about the HomoMill project space, and that is Rebecca Power, who has been employed by Islington Mill to run the club space and to kind of head up the HomoMill project space with the involvement of other people from the community. But Rebecca wasn't available the last time I did those interviews, so I took a moment to sit down with Rebecca earlier this week and get the lowdown on what is happening with the HomoMill project space, what her involvement and her vision for the space is, and also about some of the very exciting things that are going to be happening in the space this Pride weekend, which, as I'm recording this right now, it's Friday afternoon, and Pride is just about to kick off, official Pride in the gay village, but also just Manchester Pride all over Manchester City, with a huge range of different events happening out with the official Manchester Pride remit in the village, including Bummer Camp at Islington Mill. I'm going to talk more about Bummer Camp after I've put in this interview with Rebecca, because it's come to my attention that there is a whole new generation of folks working at Islington Mill and involved in the space and the different projects that are happening there that don't know what Bummer Camp is. So I'm going to take a little moment to explain the history of the event and why I think, and other people at the Mill think, it's so important to bring that back for the Islington Mill club space this Pride weekend. That's happening tomorrow, Saturday, on the Islington Mill club space. I'll be talking more about that further on in this podcast. But for now, I'm going to hand over again to myself with Rebecca Power to talk about her involvement in the HomoMill club space project. Let's go. Okay, we're rolling. I'm here in Studio 409 in Dead Air with Rebecca. Rebecca, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Niall.
And welcome to the podcast. So the last episode of the podcast, I talked to Bill and Rod and Sophie about what's happening in the club space downstairs. I wanted to speak to you too, but you were away.
Yeah.
You were taking a much well-needed holiday.
In the French Riviera.
Wow, get it, girl. So now you're back and you're brown and you're like chilled and like, yeah, ready to go. I'm going to talk to you about the club space in a minute, but first, tell us who you are, Rebecca, and what you do here at Islington Mill.
So I have recently joined Islington Mill as the venue manager, looking after the club space. infamous for many years.
Yeah.
It's gone through many different hands.
Yeah.
And now it's fallen into mine.
Before you did that, though, you were at a very well-known venue.
I was.
Yeah.
Before that, I cut my teeth at the White Hotel.
Wow.
I was there. Well, I started there very casually. Well, we all started there very casually back in like 2017. Just like bopping, doing door and bar, and like worked there on and off because it's a hard graft. It's long hours.
Yeah, totally.
And then I went full time there a couple of years ago as a manager, and then had to give it up because it's very intense.
Yeah, I can imagine. It must be a great, like you said, you cut your teeth, a great training ground, though. It's kind of like deep end kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, you get put into so many situations that you're just like, that are so like unique and special to that place, and
even just the hours as well. It's up until 7 a.m.
Yeah, and then but if you're a manager, you're working till like 9, 11 a.m.
Yeah, totally. And starting before probably as well.
Exactly. So you're doing like 13-hour shifts like every weekend, which is quite wild. But yeah, it was interesting. Lots and lots of different situations that you're put in, and you have to kind of think on your feet and adapt and be flexible, and just kind of also really have like a great approach to everyone who comes into the space, and also like to ensure the safety of everyone and kind of make sure that there's like enough freedom but also enough kind of like security that everyone feels like taken care of but also left alone.
Yeah, totally. That is true, actually. Man, you're making me think about like my hotel experiences. It always feels very safe without it being intimidatingly, like, you're being watched or anything, but it still feels very safe. Yeah,
definitely. And I think like that's the great thing about the White Hotel is like finessing that kind of like balance of freedom, but also like we got you.
Yeah. And is that something you want to do here, or?
Definitely. I feel like it's something that should be adopted in all the venues to kind of create that freedom that we're all looking for within the arts.
Yeah.
And why we all go to these spaces is to kind of escape. It's to hedonism. It's to have a dance and to let loose with your friends. And I feel that like, and making sure that you have trust in the venue that they have got you, and like you can go and do that without kind of being policed or watched or observed. Yeah. But then knowing that like there are measures in place to know that like that you're okay and it's a safe space to do so. And that's definitely something that I want to bring over to the Mill.
Cool.
In terms of like security, staff, like ethos, and like how it's ran and who we have and who we play. Yeah.
How did you get started working at the Mill?
So I actually got shouted from by Partisan.
Okay.
So they were having some trouble kind of running the club space. They were in it before, just up until July. And I think they were struggling financially and also like structurally. And they asked me to come and help out. But then they got hit with a big VAT bill, which was just so unfair, and really like knocked them sideways, which made them reevaluate things, and then they came out of the Mill, which then meant that I kind of no longer was needed for them. But then me, Isadora and Rachel had struck up a really good relationship from me working with Partisan. And then they were like, we don't want you to leave. So then they offered me a job, which was great. So here I am, speaking to you.
Cool. And so I did speak to the other three on the last podcast about the project that's happening downstairs in the club space. But could you give us can you explain that now? Because you were the fourth person who was missing from that interview.
Okay, fair. Yeah, so it's my understanding that HomoBlock have amazingly raised about almost £11,000 for the Islington Mill Foundation, which is a charity, which then is going to enable them to come and take over the club space from August to November to run a community residency, which will help facilitate anything that the community kind of want to do. So if that's a Vogue workshop.
Yeah.
If it's a self-defense class,
Yeah.
if it's someone who just wants to come and drum for a week in the space, they can come and they can do that, and they can book it out, and they can use the facilities. If they want to come and shadow on events, anything, if they've got like, some students in, see how a venue is actually ran.
Yeah.
There's kind of scope for anything really.
Yeah.
To kind of feed back and trickle into the community, to get this amazing ecology of the mill trickling, flowing.
And if anybody listening to this would have a use for the space and would like to kind of pursue that, how's the best way to do that? Like, to get in touch with you, or what is there a...
Yeah, if anyone wants to come and be a part of, they have an idea, if they want to do a workshop, or if they've got an event idea, and think that it fits into like the Homo block and the Islington Mill ethos of like queer community focus education, contact me or contact anyone from the mill that you know. We'll add you to the group, and then you're able to like book some slots. They're like 3-hour slots. You get given some community guidelines that you kind of have to adhere to, which I think everyone will. And then you get given access to the space, and it's like, you know, it's a very accountable, trust, community, honesty. You go in, the space is yours. You do what you want with it, and then you leave it how it is.
And you're expected to run it yourself, so not necessarily being supervised or anything. It's
like people will be about, but it's not like you're going to be, again, watched or supervised or whatever. Like, you go in and the space is yours, and you can use it once a week, you can use it twice a week. If you've got a project that has a goal, then we'll work with you on that, and we'll help you facilitate whatever it is that you want. But it's open to anyone.
And just so people are aware, what are the facilities going to be in the club in terms of, it's going to be pretty bare, right? So if you want to, for instance, just pick something like a life drawing, you need to bring everything.
So we're offering the space, but I guess if someone has materials that they need, they'd have to be self-sufficient in bringing that with them. In terms of what we're offering is a space, there's a PA, there's lighting, there's staging, but in terms of like actual material costs, we can't provide that. But then also that doesn't mean that we can't help people like raise funds. If they want to do a crowdfunder, if they want to like look into National Lottery project grants, we're more than happy to help and sit down and have meetings with people to achieve that. Like if they want to run like a cinema series, and they need some funding to cover travel costs, or whatnot, we'll sit down and help them write some bids.
That's great, because I do have, like, I'm going to be involved in this project as well, and I do have things that I'd like to put on in there, but some of them I'm thinking if we had a bit of budget it would be so much better. So it's good to know that, like, that there are, potentials for getting... Yeah,
definitely. I feel like, obviously, because we're also a CIC and a charity, so it's not for profit, but we are, so keen to help other people achieve what they want. And you're right, like, everything is always so much better with a budget. So if there's ways that we can help show people how to access funds and to show people what's out there for people, because I think as well, like, people don't know where to look for these kind of things, and I think once you kind of show someone the direction, it opens their world up to so many possibilities.
That's community,
and that's community, baby.
That's community, baby. So it's basically the middle of August. And not this weekend, but actually a week today, it's Manchester Pride. Whoop. Oh my God, that's come around really quick. So, this club space is going to be open over Manchester Pride, isn't it?
It is.
Can you tell us about the programming and what's going on downstairs over this, not this weekend, but the next weekend over the course of Manchester Pride? Yeah,
we are very, very excited for Pride weekend. We have 2 events, Saturday and Sunday. Saturday we have a stonker of a party It's and this is something that I was very new to as well. When Joe and Rod got in contact with me, they were like, "We've got this idea. We want to bring back Bummer Camp," and I was like, "What the hell is Bummer Camp?"
Well, just to spoiler alert, that's actually what this podcast is about. We're just setting the context for that. So there's going to be another interview after this one to discuss what is Bummer Camp. But can you tell us what is happening at Bummer Camp this year?
Definitely. So, the Revenge of Bummer Camp is happening on Saturday, the 24th of August, and you can see Plaque Blake.
Yeah, Plaque
Blake. Because I always get that wrong.
Yeah.
Archfemesis.
Oh man, yes.
Yaya. The Fat Britney. DJ Clickbait. Molly fucking Rush.
Yeah.
Who we saw at Supernormal a couple of weekends ago and absolutely killed it on the main stage on Saturday. So that is going to be very exciting. We also have Coke's Bollocks DJs, Beardry Barlow, out of retirement. Out of retirement, she's off ice, and she'll be DJing.
There's someone else in semi-retirement as well who's coming out of semi-retirement for this gig.
Who's that?
The Nihilist.
The Nihilist.
Yes, so I'm going to be doing a set, but I'm concentrating on ballroom at the moment and using my ballroom alias mainly. But I'm coming out of as a Bollocks DJ, so I'm going to be doing a Nihilist set at Bummer Camp.
Yes, are you? Well, that is news to me.
Cool.
But I love that.
Yeah.
More the merrier. And also, we have a bouncy castle.
Oh my god, yeah, of course, the bouncy castle.
Save the best till last.
Yeah.
That's going to be supervised
by the fuck pigs.
Oink
oink. It's going to be fun.
Oink oink bitches.
Well, I'll get into the actual meet Bummer Camp later on, but that's not the only thing that's happening though. Can you tell us about the programming for the rest of the weekend?
So on the Sunday we also have the amazing documentary Rebel Dykes. Have you seen it?
Yeah, of course. I've seen it a few times now.
Incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
And we've managed to get all of the great directors and producers, that's Sean, Harry and Siobhan, over to the Mill. So we're going to screen one of Siobhan's films that she's worked on recently called Beautiful Trouble, which is this really great 20-minute short film about a Jewish activist called Dan Glass as he kind of goes around and plays all of these great political pranks on people like Trump baby. So we're having that first, and then we're having Rebel Dykes, and then there's a Q&A that's going to be hosted by the fabulous Ivy Profem.
Oh, excellent.
And then we're going to have Alt Femme DJs afterwards.
Excellent.
So it's going to be a great weekend at the Mill. You can get tickets on Resident Advisor, and Sunday is free, but you just have to reserve a ticket on Eventbrite.
Sure.
Which is all on our link tree on our Instagram profile.
The Instagram of
Islington
Mill. Okay,
yes.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much. I will put all the relevant links and stuff in the info for this anyway.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, and I'll see
no
you,
worries.
See you next weekend.
See you next weekend. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
And there you have it. That was me, the Nihilist, talking to Rebecca Power, who is heading up the HomoMill project space project and was the missing piece of the interview puzzle that I couldn't get to fit in for the last edition of Islington Mill, but I was really keen to get her to talk on the podcast about the HomoMill project and what her vision for that is. And as she mentioned, the space is going to be open this weekend, this very Manchester Pride weekend, with an event, well, a series of events, but on the Saturday night, the big club party is Bummer Camp. I'm going to get to Bummer Camp in a minute, but I was in the Mill yesterday in the club space, and I actually happened to bump into some of the people who run Islington Mill, that being Morris Carlin, Bill Campbell, Rachel Goodyear, and also there was Paddy from Nod, who has previously been on the Islington Mill podcast. And as they were all there, gathered in the club space, looking at it and thinking about how to decorate it for its opening up tomorrow for Bummer Camp, I asked them all to do a quick little vox pop about what does Bummer Camp mean to each of them. And let's hear what they had to say.
Don't know, I've never been.
Screaming drag queens and butt plugs.
Would you like to expand on that?
What, on the butt plugs?
Yeah, or
Did you record that then?
This is recording now.
Okay. So should I say what it means to me?
Do? Yeah, please.
To me, it means screaming drag queens, bouncy castles and butt plugs.
Cool.
In fact, I think it should be renamed that.
Emma, what are your thoughts?
Trouble. Some trouble.
Rachel, you had a story you were telling the group?
Yeah, well, it involves bouncing
Okay.
and being catapulted through the air of
Right.
bouncing things.
How did that happen?
I'd say it's just like gravity.
Okay.
Physics.
Science. Yeah.
Science, yeah. Fun.
Where's this going?
On the podcast. Bill, what does Bummercamp mean to you?
Bummercamp means Christine, the goddess of sleaze and filth.
Mm-hmm.
But this time we've got some new...
We do have a different Queen of Sleaze and Filth coming.
So, Queens of Sleaze and Filth.
Cool.
Cool.
Maury, anything to chip in? Jack?
Giant rainbow-coloured turds.
I missed that part.
Yet to come at this year's Bummercamp.
And there you have that little gathering of minds talking about what Bummercamp is, was, will be. Bummercamp. So now it's my turn to talk about this thing. And where do we start? I mean, I guess with those Vox Pops, there's some interesting things popping out there that people who don't know what Bummercamp is might be intrigued to find out more about, namely the butt plugs and bouncy castles and maybe even drag queens. I will say at this point in 2024, there's tons of drag queens working, socialising, hanging out at Islington Mill. So the presence of drag queens around the mill at this point in time is no great shakes. We've all gotten used to the incredible drag talent that is based at Islington Mill. But in the first year that Bummercamp happened, which was 2013, the presence of drag queens in the mill was still quite new and quite fresh. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that Bummercamp was one of the events that really solidified the queer identity of Islington Mill as a creative community. It seems quite dyed in the wool now that that's the case, but back then it wasn't so obvious, and it took some certain events and the involvement of certain creatives to really push that part of Islington Mill and the community's identity forward. And how did that happen? Okay, let's talk about it. So the big C, let's start with the big C. The big C standing for Christine. So I just need to say as well at this point that it is quite funny to me that there is, and cool though, not in a bad way, but also just kind of like mind-blowing in a way that like Bummercamp was such a big deal for us when it happened. Originally, the first one happened in 2013, which is 11 years ago now, which is another wild thing for me that it's been 11 years since we started that. But in those 11 years, a whole new generation of people have come into Manchester, come into the Greater Manchester queer community, and even more specifically, come into Islington Mill community and either work there or hang out there, go to events there, have friends who work there, etc., etc. And it's come quite obvious to me that there is a whole new generation of people to whom Bummercamp doesn't mean anything and they want to know what it is. So this is me taking the time to kind of explain what Bummercamp was and is and hopefully will be, and just to let people know what exactly it is. I think it's a very provocative name, actually, Bummercamp. And before I get to Christine, I'm going to start with the name Bummercamp because there is quite a funny little anecdote to tell about that. So I think it was, I'm not sure if it was the first Bummercamp or if it was the second Bummercamp. I think it might have been the second Bummercamp that we put on at Islington Mill. We printed up a series of A0 posters that spelled out the name Bummercamp. So that's BUMMERCAMP, which when you add them all up is 10. Now, the front facade of Islington Mill has changed slightly in that some windows have been put in and some things have been covered up. But back in 2013, there was exactly 10 slots of A0 size poster spaces on the front of Islington Mill. So I think it might have been my idea, but it could have been someone else's idea. I don't want to take credit here. There was a bunch of people involved in getting Bummer Camp up off the ground and rolling as successfully as it did. But anyway, somebody, could have been me, I might be mistaken there, somebody had the idea to let's print out the name Bummer Camp on massive A0 sheets, paste them all down the front of Islington Mill so that anyone who comes to the mill quite obviously knows where Bummer Camp is happening, because we were doing a really big push for Bummer Camp on the PRs at that point as well, which was a different, oh God, like thinking back on this now, it was such a different scene for PR back then. And we had to do a lot more real world work to get the word out there about what this was happening. So, of course, the idea to put the name of this event in massive, in case you're not aware, A0 is the biggest print size you can get. So we're talking about 10 A0s all the way down the front of Islington Mill saying, Bummer Camp. However, if you've been to Islington Mill, you might have noticed that it's actually opposite a school. It's opposite a primary school. And it was later, after Bummer Camp had happened, that there was a community meeting of the people who live around the Islington Mill area, the Islington estate itself. And at this point in time, me and my partner Joe Spencer were also living on the estate in the top floor of Arthur Millwood Court, which is one of the big high-rises you can see from the courtyard of Islington Mill just outside the gate. So I went along at the bequest of other people working at the mill who would like some support and stuff. I went along to one of these community meetings, which were being held in the church off Chapel Street. The community meetings were coming together because some of the other residents of the general Islington estate community had some issues with what was happening at Islington Mill, especially the noise, but also some of the other things that were happening at the mill that was making them feel a certain way. And at that meeting, it was made clear to me that people in the community around Islington Mill took great offence at the sign Bummer Camp being put up outside the mill, especially opposite a primary school. I believe this happened in the midsummer though, so I don't think that there was any actual children running around. But we did hear from some of the people who came to the meeting from the Islington estate that they were shocked and saddened by the sign that was put up and had to take the time to explain to their dear little children what exactly Bummer meant. And that this caused great offence because it meant that they were forced to talk about sexuality, potentially, I assume, to their children. I don't really understand this to this day, to be honest, because the reason that we chose the name Bummer Camp, yes, it does have a sexual connotation. It's got a very, if you know, it's got a very queer connotation. Bummer is a word that is often used to denigrate homosexuals, especially male homosexuals, people who are perceived to engage in anal sex, aka bumming. And for us, it was a really cute play on words based around a summer camp, but for queers, a summer camp for bummers, essentially. But one of the things about picking the name Bummer Camp is that it could easily be explained away to anyone who didn't know exactly what that was and what the connotation of it means. Because I'm sure we're all aware of what bummer means out with the queer and sexual, that meaning of the word. Bummer just means a downer. It just means I'm really bummed out. That wasn't like something happened and it's not nice and now it was a real bummer. I'm really bummed out. So to me, it was really funny that straight people took such offence at a word that could so easily be explained away to a point where it's just like, wow, straight people are much more snowflakey than queers are, really. If they feel that they have a problem explaining to their child what being bummed out means and what bummer means in a non-sexual context, it's quite wild to me, actually, that they didn't think that they could just say to their children, oh, it just means when somebody's not happy. This is maybe a camp for people who aren't feeling happy and to make them feel happier. I just still to this day don't understand why a straight person would be so offended at such an easily explainable double entendre, to the point where I just feel like actually it wasn't even the double entendre that was offensive there, was it? All I can say is that they took offence at the brazen act of queer visibility that we were doing by putting that sign up outside Islington Mill. But anyway, that's the end of that story about the offence that was taken at the name Bummer Camp and how what I thought was a lovely PR gimmick of putting huge posters all the way down the front wall of the mill spelling out Bummer Camp actually offended a bunch of straight people who potentially had children, hypothetically, in the school that was closed at the time. But that was one of the effects that I had on the community outside of Islington Mill. But the effect of Bummer Camp on the community in Islington Mill, to this day, it's still felt, and it's really, really hard to quantify because it was such a moment of the entire community really coming together and solidifying who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And cycling back to something that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, but before I got derailed by the little anecdote about the sign on the wall, it was all about the big C. Well, there was the big C and then there was the big S in the first year, but I'll tell you more about the big S in a minute, but I'm going to go back to the big C. The big C, when it comes to Bummer Camp, refers to the artist known as Christine, who is a drag performance artist, but who describes their drag as being akin to terrorism. And as I'm doing this podcast explaining the history and the meaning of Bummer Camp to a potential new audience for Bummer Camp, I'm also assuming that a lot of this audience won't know who Christine is. And I'm going to take a moment to explain who Christine is, what Christine represents, and how we got to know Christine. Because actually Bummer Camp came together as a gig booking because Christine was touring and we were desperate to put this act on, so we jumped at the chance. So Christine, the influence of the artist Christine in my own life, on my own queerness, on my own art is completely immeasurable. They're an incredible performance artist that makes really club bangy tunes. You can dance to it. You can get down to it. There's some slow numbers that you can groove to it. There's some very sexy music in it. The entire Christine persona is incredibly sexual, but also very liberatory because it's celebrating aspects of sexuality, particularly queer sexuality, that are denigrated in the mainstream. So Christine is a drag act. They were based in New Orleans at the time. They've since moved to New York. And how we got to know Christine. So this is kind of going down a bit of a detour. This is another little anecdote that I have to drop. So me and my partner Joe Spencer used to promote a series of events and club nights and things and screenings and stuff like that under the name Tranarchy, which it's become quite legendary now in the annals of Manchester's queer clubbing history. But before we got round to officially forming ourselves as Tranarchy, this is actually before we even put on our first ever event together, before we actually officially started working together, which was Vogue Brawl, which happened at Legends, R.I.P. Legends, in January of 2011. Before any of that even happened, the first thing that me and Joe Spencer did together in an artistic context was in October of 2010. I had just freshly arrived in Manchester. I'd only literally been here a matter of months. Joe told me that there was a drag queen coming from San Francisco called Peaches Christ. Peaches Christ was very well known at the time in alternative drag circles, and Peaches Christ's thing is that she screens midnight movies and she organises around the midnight movies interactive shows. And there would be a lot of drag performance, there would be games to do, to play with the audience that had to do with the theme of whatever movie they were showing at the time. And it was just very interactive, performative, midnight screenings. In fact, what Peaches used to do was called Midnight Mass. I don't think she does it anymore. She's still a very active drag queen. She's still out there. You should check her out. Peaches Christ. She's awesome. But Peaches Christ came to Manchester in October of 2010 to screen her own directorial debut, the film All About Evil, which is another amazing queer trash classic. If you get a chance, if you ever see the name All About Evil come up on any streaming services or anywhere you're flicking through movies that you want to watch and it comes up, I would highly recommend watching All About Evil. So Peaches came over to Manchester in October 2010, and the producer Bren Campbell put out word that he was looking for performers and artists from the queer community in Manchester to get involved with a really big interactive performative art midnight mass style show for Peaches' actual own directorial debut to be shown at the Corner House, which is now, Corner House mutated into something called Home, which then moved into Hume. But at the time, this was at that cross-section of Oxford Road and I think it's Portland Street, by the, I don't even know if any of that stuff is there now. Oh no, the train station is still there. So the Oxford Road train station, right outside that, used to be the cinema of the Corner House. Me and Joe got involved in the shenanigans around the screening of All About Evil by pretending to be librarians and hosting a Ban This Filth style protest outside the screening. a protest that went so successfully that people actually thought it was a real thing, and I think they believed the police were called, and we all had to be told to calm it down and shuffle our way inside because people on the street thought that this was a real thing. They didn't realise it was performance art. We had an amazing time. It was a very magical thing, actually, that screening of All About Evil, and it really cemented me and Joe's artistic collaborative relationship. Now, one of the nights after one of the screenings, we ended up back at Peach's, Joshua's, their government name. We ended back up at Joshua's hotel room. We were just hanging around, shooting the shit. And Joshua turned to us and said, have you guys ever heard of Christine? Because if not, check this out. You're going to love it. Josh went and put on a couple of Christine videos on the laptop. The YouTube was there at the time. And my God, we were blown away. Like, it's really hard to explain at this point in time in 2024, like 15 years later, basically, the queer culture that exists now is very well developed. It's great. There's like so many different kinds of queers and so many different kind of things going on, and it's very healthy, and it's a lot more accepted in the mainstream. The social acceptance of people in the queer rainbow is better, even though it's not perfect. Obviously, I'm not saying that, but it is better in certain ways, not in every way. I mean, F the bloody Tories and what they have done to trans rights in this country, those assholes. But at that time, in a lot of ways, it was worse. So when we were shown the videos by this performer called Christine, it was a mind-blowing experience because it was one of the most forthright, righteous, punk, fuck you, but celebratory and sexual and no prisoners and no shame, all that amazing stuff. It was just an apex moment of drag for us, and we fell in love with this artist called Christine. All that content is still out there. You can still see it. The kind of high point of that era of Christine's career for me is a video called African Mayonnaise. If you've never heard of Christine, go on YouTube after you've listened to this, or maybe just pause it right now and go on YouTube and put on the video for African Mayonnaise, and you will see what an incredible impact this performer doing their thing has, not just on general society as a whole, but on us as other artists who were became so obsessed with this artist and the things that they did, and the ballsy nature in which they put forward queer yet filth as a beautiful celebratory aesthetic, as the ultimate fuck you to the heteronormative mainstream. We fell in love with Christine to the point where I start messaging Christine, whose government name is Paul. We did some work together, in fact. I produced a track for my mixtape, AKA, and had Christine on it, with some bars also from the iconic, legendary Manchester alternative drag pioneer, Jaja Noir. Shout out to Jaja, who's still around. And we worked together on a track called I'm Weird, which you can find on my AKA mixtape. I'll probably play this actually at the end of the podcast, just as a little, just as a little aside to go, this is the things that we did together with Christine. But in 2013, Paul reached out to me and told me that he was looking to tour Europe, and would there be any way that we could get a gig for him? I mean, oh my God, like as soon as I told Joe that this was potentially, we have to make this happen. We have to make this happen. We didn't really know how to make this happen exactly though, because, Christine's a legit for real artist. She has a budget. She needs to have her needs met. We wanted to do this kind of show to a much better level than the shows we had done before. So we ended up chatting to Riv Burns, who at the time was booking the music at the Islington Mill club space. Riv was working under the title Off With Their Heads, I believe. I could be wrong there. Sorry, Riv, I got that wrong. But I'm pretty sure it was Off With Their Heads. And Riv was the music and talent booker for the club space at Islington Mill in 2013. So we approached Riv, and with absolutely no hesitation, Riv, who was probably somebody that we had shown Christine's video to, also Bill from the Mill, Bill Campbell. We'd been very proactive in showing Bill, like, Bill, have you heard of this Christine? Look at this, it's amazing. Everyone who saw Christine at that point was just like, holy shit, you guys, this is the absolute apex of queer culture at that time, as just the most incredible fuck you to the mainstream that made all the queers feel so validated. It was very, very important, actually. And thankfully, Riv Burns, and possibly with Mark Carlin as well. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to get back to you on that. But definitely me and Joe were in conversation with Riv, and Riv was just like, don't worry about it, guys. This is going to happen. Let's make this happen. So that was the roots of Bummer Camp, to be honest. Although there's there's even more to the story. There was another artist at the time who was very different to Christine, but also offered apex queer excellence that we were mad about. That artist who, they still do release music occasionally, but they've been quiet for quite a while, actually, so I'm not really sure about that. But this artist is called Sean, which, when you see it spelled down, is Ssion. Now, as luck would have it, it's like when you're waiting for a bus, when your bus doesn't come and then two come along at once. Like literally days after we had been approached by Paul about the Christine tour and then took that to Riv and got a confirmation that, yes, Riv, let's do this. Let's get Christine on at Islington Mill. It's such an important moment for our community and for the culture. Sean, actually, I was in contact with Cody, is their government name. I was in touch with Cody, and Cody reached out to me going, I'm looking to get a Sean tour in Europe. Do you guys know anywhere I could get booked? And we were like, fuck, we just got Christine booked. There's no way we can get these two both incredible artists, our dream bookings, basically. We just felt like there was no way to get them both booked because we didn't have the budget. We didn't think the Mill would have the budget. But as luck would have it, when we mentioned this to Riv Burns, oh my God, Riv, incredible promoter and stuff as she is, just turned around and go, let's do both. Let's do both of them. They will be on different days. One was on a Saturday and the next gig was on the Wednesday, but we did it as a double deal packet. So you could buy tickets to either one of the individual gigs, or you could buy a ticket for both the gigs that was reduced price than what it would be to buy the two individual gigs. So Bummer Camp wasn't just one gig when it started, it was actually two, representing Christine on the Saturday night, I believe it was, and then Sean on the Tuesday or the following Tuesday or Wednesday. And like, we were kids at the time, like me and Joe, and just to be able to actually because we had sat down and thought, like, who are our dream bookings? And, there's obviously like big things that we didn't get around to, like the Gossip or whatever, and some other things. But that summer was incredible because 3 of our dream bookings, we got to work with. 2 of them became our co-bookings. We were involved in the booking of 2 of them. And the third one, which was on our list, and for me was like one of the highlights, was Mickey Blanco played at Islington Mill in 2013. It wasn't a Bummer Camp event. I believe it was Off With Their Heads. But I got to support Mickey Blanco as the nihilist. I did a live PA supporting Mickey Blanco, like even just saying it now is mind-blowing. Supporting Mickey Blanco, and Mickey Blanco's show was incredible. Just one person on a stage with a DJ to fire off the tracks, but also do a bit of scratching and stuff. It was incredible, intense, transformative, very, very queer. Mickey started the show as a boy, ended the show as a girl. It was all about genderfolk. It was beautiful. That all to me rolls into what was the original Bummer Camp kind of era. These incredible queer gigs that really, really brought forward this incredible queer talent and spotlighted it on a stage. And that allowed the queerness of the community that was there to be expressed so much more freely and deeply and with so much more joy and less shame, basically. And the Christine gig itself was incredible. Christine is just one of the best live shows you will ever see. And if you're queer, you'll appreciate it even more. Because it's just, the music is fab, it's dancey, but it's really righteous. What I would describe Christine to people who've never heard of this artist before, I'd be like, and I did say this back in the day, when I was a blogger back in that era and sending stuff out, trying to get doing a bit of PR work for my own stuff, but also trying to get people to look at some of the cool shit that I was into that I felt should get more attention. I was describing Christine as being like the queer Public Enemy. Oh God. And now I'm saying Public Enemy, I realize probably this whole new generation doesn't even know who Public Enemy is. But kids, if you don't know who Public Enemy is, just type into Google Public Enemy band and prepare to have your mind ripped open by probably the greatest hip-hop group of all time. And to me, Christine was like our version of that. The show is incredible. Christine's such a slick, incredibly well-trained performer that it seems loose and very natural, and there's a whole kind of filthy aesthetic, and it's dirty and it's sweaty and it's raw and it's nasty, but it's very well drilled. And the most there was a few, but one of the most iconic things about Christine's performance is how it starts, is that Christine is brought through the crowd by her two dancers on their backs. She's lifted up over the crowd and dragged through the crowd on her back, while a butt plug that is tied to a number of helium balloons is inside her anus, and when she gets to the stage, she releases the butt plug, and it's because it's tied to helium balloons, it floats away across the venue. And this happened at Islington Mill, and apparently the butt plug landed in somebody's face, which is a great claim to fame. If you are that person who got smacked in the faces by Christine's butt plug, you should wear that with a badge of pride. It's just the effect that these gigs and that moment had on crystallizing what Islington Mill is now is just I can't even describe it really. I'm losing the words here. It's just so important and so central. And I want to give a big shout out. I really want to shout. I've already talked about Riv Burns. Massive shout to Riv. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for Riv Burns. Big shout out to Bill and Maury as well, obviously. And I want to take this moment to reflect on the incredible impact that our darling yet dear departed Louise Woodcock had on these series of events. Big shout out to Pam Van Damned as well. She was integral and central to Tranarchy at that time and getting this stuff happening with us. But I want to really remind people of the effect that Louise Woodcock had on the crystallization and the putting on of Bummer Camp, and how much we all dearly, dearly miss that woman and her incredible presence. And looking at Bummer Camp now and what we're doing with it now, I'd like to think that we're not going to do this like high key, but just low key for the old school people who are involved in this. I would like us to take a moment at Bummer Camp this weekend and just reflect on Louise and all the other incredible people that we've lost, but particularly that one who had such an integral role to play in the original Bummer Camps. And so that's the kind of history of Bummer Camp. It was like, we did it for, I think, 2 or 3 years. Christine loves, but also at that period in that area, loved Islington Mill so much that she made a particular effort to come back to Islington Mill every year. So between 2013 up to 2017, when the mill changed when the club space changed into the Makers Market and it wasn't a live gig venue anymore, Christine came back every year and we did Bummer Camp 2 or 3 times. As the years progressed, Bummer Camp kind of changed. It wasn't called Bummer Camp anymore. And then when Makers Market took over the club space lease and it wasn't a live venue anymore, we started working with other venues like Islington Mill. I'm talking about Islington Mill. We started working with the White Hotel and we put on 2 summer gigs with Christine there, one of them called Gross Indecency and one of them called Stanky Place, which are kind of legendary events in the history of the White Hotel and turning that place very queer as well. We did that. Thank you very much. But reflecting now on what Bummer Camp means to a new generation, I hope it will bring forth the same spirit of queer enthusiasm and joy and community that the first series of Bummer Camp events brought out of Islington Mill. This time around, it's been, so I think the last Bummer, 2013, 2014, 2015. So it's nearly 9 years since there was a Bummer Camp. And, that was a different era and things have changed. So for this time round, Christine is not going to be performing at this Bummer Camp, I'm afraid. However, Christine is going to be appearing at this year's Homo Block, which is, oh my God, like seeing Christine performing a Homo Block. If you haven't got your Homo Block tickets, or if you are going to be a Homo Block, make sure you see Christine. And if you haven't seen them before, even more so, because that is an absolutely life-changing queer performance. And up there with Peaches, all the classic, Mickey Blanco, all the greats. Mickey Blanco is also going to be appearing at this year's Homo Block. Oh my God, the lineup for Homo Block this year is sickening. Well done, Rod Connolly. So Christine's going to be appearing at Homo Block this year, which I highly recommend everyone to go and see. That is going to be a major moment. You mark my words. But this time round, she's not appearing at Bummer Camp. However, the reason that we've got Bummer Camp happening this year is because there was another act who we've been following quite closely for the last few years, and who has previously performed at the White Hotel and has kept in close contact with my partner Joe Spencer, and who approached Joe a couple of months ago saying that he are looking for a gig, happened to be over the weekend of Manchester Pride, and this is it, basically. This act, they're an American industrial techno queer performance act called Plaque Plague, which is like Black Plague, but with the first letters of each word swapped. Plaque Plague. They are incredible, and there's nothing like... It's going to be a different Bummer Camp this time around because it's not based around Christine, but basing it around Plaque Plague, it's going to go off, and I really think it will foster and embolden the queer community sense that already exists in Islington Mill, and hopefully bring back maybe Bummer Camp. Maybe we should do it every year again, see how it goes with this one, and maybe think about bringing it back next year. There's some amazing stuff on the bill as well. We've got Archfemesis playing, who, if you don't know, you should get into them. Archfemesis. Oh God, there's so much on the bill I can't even think off the top of my name. There's a lot of bollocks DJs and a lot of DJs who may not... Well, they are still bollocks DJs. I think most of the DJs who are going to be performing at the night are kind of bollocks, if not bollocks residents, very bollocks adjacent, have played at bollocks loads. So it's got a very big kind of bollocks vibe to it as well. And there is going to be a bouncy castle. Oh yeah, and that was another thing I forgot to say about the original, Bummer Camp. We decided that we wanted a sissy bounce castle, which was put out in the courtyard and blown up and stayed there all day Saturday and had to go on Sunday morning. So one of the draws to the original Bummer Camp was the bloody bouncy castle that we had. And you know what? We've got another bouncy castle again. There's going to be one outside Mark the Printers, and it's going to be manned and staffed by the fuck pigs. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So there's a big fuck pigs presence at Bummer Camp this year. There's a big bollocks presence at Bummer Camp this year. And it's Bummer Camp. So it's like Islington Mill queer community coming back together to do this one-off for now gig. But we'll see how it goes. And if it goes well, I'd be really keen to do Bummer Camp every year at Islington Mill again, if that's the thing. So that's kind of half an hour now of me spraffling nonsense about Bummer Camp. But I hope that has filled people in as to what it was. Oh, and there was another thing that we did actually that I just completely forgot about. I remember now. We put on something called the Bummer Bus. So at this point in time, in 2013, people, especially like drags, gender fluid kids, trans kids, flashy F-word kids, flamings. A lot of folk like that had a bit of a reticence about coming into Salford and going to Islington Mill because it is a bit of a trek from the village. And at that point in time, queer culture was a lot less seated outside the gay village in Manchester. So it felt a lot more edgy to be walking through town all done up in your finery and your very queer signalling glad rags. So we did a thing called a Bummer Bus, where we hired out a small minibus to drive around town picking up people who wanted to come to Bummer Camp, because we were aware that it's about accessibility and it's also about safety. This year we're not doing the Bummer Bus, but in future, if Bummer Camp goes well this year and we decide to do more of them, I think bringing back the Bummer Bus would be a great idea. But we'll see how it goes this year. I need to stop talking now because I'm just... I need to go. But I think I've said my piece about Bummer Camp, and it's a very, very special occasion. It's happening tomorrow. Well, I think this is going to go out on Saturday. So it'll be happening... I'm just going to say I'm recording this on Friday, but Bummer Camp is happening on Saturday, and I'm not going to get a chance to edit this and put this online before tomorrow, but I will get it up tomorrow. So I'm going to say Bummer Camp is happening tonight at Islington Mill, in the Islington Mill club space. It runs from 10 till 4 with the live acts Plaque Plague and Archfemesis. Loads of different bollocks DJs are going to be playing, and the fuck pigs are going to be hosting the bouncy castle in the smoking area gateway bit. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I also have to give a shout out to, on the Sunday, sorry, this episode has been about Bummer Camp. I should probably do another episode about this after the fact. But the Sunday in the Islington Mill club space is being given over to Rebel Dykes, which is a film directed by well, there's a group of people who created the film. I'm going to shout them all out. Harry Shanahan, Shan Williams, and Siobhan Rosebush. I'll just say Rosebush. Because Rebel Dykes is a documentary about an incredible lesbian scene in London that was kind of like, I think it's like mid to late 80s, possibly very early 90s as well. And there's going to be a free screening of Rebel Dykes in the club space on the Sunday night with Siobhan, Shan and Harry in attendance for an open panel discussion about the film at the end of it. And it's all being hosted and put together by Alt Femme and our very own, Dead Air's very own DJ Clipbait, who I should actually probably get an interview with Clipbait at some point about the history of Alt Femme. Sorry to leave Alt Femme till the very end of this episode, but don't worry guys, I think you deserve your own episode at some point. I'll get around to doing that soon. So if you're around Manchester this weekend and you don't want to go to the actual Manchester Pride, corporate Pride, or you just want to do something different, then get your butts down to Islington Mill, to the club space, for Bummer Camp on the Saturday evening and night. And on Sunday afternoon into early evening, it will be Alt Femme presents the Rebel Dykes screening with the Rebel Dykes crew question and answer open panel session at the end. And my voice is getting sore now because I'm looking at the clock now and I've been speaking solidly for almost 35 minutes. So that's the end of this two-parter of Islington Mill and about the HomoMill project space, with a big detour into the history of Bummer Camp there for part 2. I'll be back next month with something else. I don't know what it is yet, but it's Pride. Happy Pride, everybody in Manchester. Get out there, get visible on the streets. It's really important this year, even though all the political stuff around Manchester Pride, which is awkward and it's not pleasant, I think it's really, really important for queers to be really visible on the streets this time. These are our streets. This is our city. This is our home. We don't feel any shame. And any of those right-wing arseholes who are making life so for everyone at the moment, fuck them. Let's get out there. Let's celebrate ourselves and each other. Happy Manchester Pride, bitches. I'll be back next month. Goodbye.